So if you're into video games, you've probably heard of Dark Souls. It's a mildly popular game that got a few sequels and only spawned a whole genre of imitators. If you're into Dark Souls, you may have heard at some point the series originates from an older franchise called Kingsfield. Kingsfield had multiple entries from the PS1 to the PS2, and it certainly had its fans. But then, in 1998, From Software released Shadow Tower, a kind of other Kingsfield that, while not related to it, shared a lot of similarities. So now we arrive at the topic of this video, with the sequel to Shadow Tower Abyss, essentially the cousin of Dark Souls. Developed by From Software, Shadow Tower Abyss was released in 2003, only in Japan. Yep, only in Japan. The worst part is that a translation was being worked on, but Sony pulled the plug on it, and this time Alice wasn't around to publish it for us. What you're seeing here is a fan patch, and it's currently the only way to play this game in English. And that's a darn shame, because this really is a hidden gem in my opinion, and I feel it may have become a classic if given the chance. But with the growing popularity of From Software's other works, let's take a look at this entry as I show you why Shadow Tower Abyss is definitely worth playing. For what I can gather online, although resources are a bit scarce, this is a sequel to Shadow Tower, but you don't need to know anything about the previous game. It starts out with the story of a legendary spear, said to grant immense power. You play as a mercenary, apparently, who is after the spear, and you find yourself at the titular Shadow Tower where it's supposedly located. You start in the ruins, you dodge out of the way at the insta-kill trap, which I think is a nod to Kingsfield. Don't worry, this game isn't filled with insta-kill traps, it's just this one. But at any rate, you find yourself face to face with the monsters of this tower. Armed with a knife, and your modern day handgun. Yep, this game is actually set in modern times. The plot here is vague, and this game doesn't have a big community creating lore videos on it. I don't really know why a bunch of stuff is, even after I beat it, but hey, climbing the tower to get the magic spear that grants wishes or something is a good enough premise. You run into a few NPCs to talk to that each have their own stories going on. It's basic, but the tower feels really well developed at times. There are even occasions where the monsters will be non-hostile or talk to you. Sometimes before you attack them, they'll be busy doing something. The further up you go, you start to wonder just what's up with this tower, as the themes of the areas get a bit more bizarre. Sure, it starts off with some foresty looking ruins, but then, after you get through the first area, you take this boat ride and arrive at a very alien part of the tower. You thought this was going to be fantasy, but then the game surprises you by actually being sci-fi. Or rather a weird mix of the two. A weird mix of the two actually kind of describes the gameplay pretty well. Shadow Tower Abyss is a first-person hack-and-slash shooter. You'll mostly slash it with your enemies, but when you're in a tough spot, or just late game, you'll likely switch to your ranged options. You'll be moving up the tower floor by floor, with each floor having one or two areas to explore, and find an elevator key to take you up further. Each area is also very different from each other in terms of design, gimmicks, and biomes. And these biomes look pretty good. The whole game looks pretty good, at least in terms of art direction. If you see any texture flickering, I can't say if that was a problem in the physical releases, but Shadow Tower Abyss has some good environment design. It also helps that the tower doesn't really make sense. It's like you go up an elevator and find yourself in a different game sometimes. All the different areas are distinct in looks, mechanics, and types of enemies, so the floors seem to have natural lighting. I don't know how this tower works, but it would keep me guessing and surprised at what I'd find next. Enemy designs look nice and are basically unique to each area, and the models for all the weapons and armor you can find look good. You also have a little guide to represent your character and what he has equipped, and it changes based on what weapons you're holding and in what hands. What might be a bit more subjective is the sound, as Shadow Tower Abyss doesn't really have much music. 90% of the game is silent and ambient noises, the sounds of your footsteps and enemies being what you'll be hearing most of the time. But the game does chime in with musical stints on occasion, like when you're transitioning to a new area or a boss fight starts. Whether or not you go for this no music approach is up to you, but personally I think it works well enough here. Getting to the gameplay, I gotta start by addressing the controls. So by default, Shadow Tower Abyss has a unique control scheme. You move around with the left stick and swing your sword with the right. It's different and actually kind of fun when you get used to it, but I can see a lot of people finding the sacrifice movement and camera control awkward. It works well enough, but if you want something a bit more traditional, you can change in the options. Regardless of how you choose to play, The actual gameplay itself is rather simple on paper. You explore each floor of the tower, encounter enemies, kill them, and finally to get stronger. Explore around, and you may find a new sword, helmet, or AR-15 assault rifle. Keep an eye out for walls that may be breakable or movable. You do seem to level up as you fight, though there isn't an experience or level system you can see. You'll just notice the baselines of your stats will gradually increase. In terms of what the stats even do, I have no idea. There doesn't seem to be anything describing them in-game, and what I could find online was someone guessing through experimentation. Luckily, this isn't so much a game about building your character. You can find these rare consumables that allow you to put extra points into whatever you want, but generally you just end up with an all-rounder build anyway, and you can play any style. You have a few options when it comes to combat: melee, magic, and ranged weapons. You'll probably be working with mostly melee weapons. They come in various types and are proficient at dealing slashing, breaking, or piercing damage. These correlate to the types of swings you can make. If you attack with a sideways swing, it's slashing, overhead for breaking, and a thrust for piercing. Just something to keep in mind if you find a hammer or something. In terms of any kind of shield, there are none, so practice your footwork. But here's where we get to one of Shadow Tower Abyss's best features: the dismemberment system. Most enemies in the game can be dismembered in one way or another. Some guy attacking you with a weapon in his right arm? Just cut it off. Cut off his other arm too so he's helpless. Shoot the wings off a flying enemy and watch them fall to the ground. This system is really fun. It turns what would be serviceable combat into something more strategic. You aren't just attacking them to deal damage, you're trying to damage them in a way that also weakens them. And there are enemies that have fun with this too and play around with it a bit. It really helps the combat go from okay to great. Moving on, we have magic. In this game, magic comes in the form of equipable rings you can cast a spell from. There are a variety of spells in the game, and they seem like they could be pretty powerful, but I found myself not really using them for a specific reason. All of your equipment in this game has durability. As durability goes down, it'll get weaker and eventually break, becoming unusable until you repair it. Now if you're worried about this system being cumbersome, it's only really noticeable early game, but it quickly becomes a minor issue. I found armor tended to hold up pretty well, only needed one or two extra pieces to swap out on occasion. Your weapons will be frequent swapping, but you'll likely be finding new ones often enough that it becomes less of an issue. Rings for casting magic have terrible durability, and they weren't worth the upkeep to repair them. To give them some credit, they are very light, so you can carry a ton of them, and again they do seem to pack a punch. I just wish I could use magic more freely without the durability issue. I should mention there are essentially three kinds of shops in the game. You have a shop to buy and sell items, and you really should sell stuff you aren't using, or store them. Going over your carry limit will slow you down and drain your health, and you can't drop items. Be sure to free up space whenever you can. Related to that, you have the shop where you can destroy extra equipment you have to fully heal yourself, well if you have some useless gear you were just going to sell anyways. And then you have the repair shop, where you spend your health to repair your items. Now, you'll amass a ton of items as you go through the game without ever having to buy any. While you swap out new better gear to replace your degraded pieces, you'll have a ton to spend for health, and in turn, health to spend on repairing. Honestly, while a bit of a factor in the early game, this unique approach to a health equipment economy kinda just diminishes later on. I think it would be neat if they went all in on this mechanic and made you make some hard choices, but it just gradually goes away and is forgotten by the end. It's a little disappointing. But while rings are powerful ranged options with limited use, guns are constant and always your friend. I use firearms pretty often late game and never had one come close to breaking. For the record, there are crossbows and the like, but who cares? I got several guns before I got a bow of some sort. The trick with the guns though is that ammunition is limited. You can't just buy unlimited bullets at the shop. You'll need to use it wisely, but when you do, it works. You may have thought this was one of those games where the guns would be weaker in exchange for the range they offer you, but no. They basically invalidate the bosses. It's actually kind of a point against the game. Fully evolved boss fights are rarer than I would like them to be, and they don't know how to handle you keeping away from them and shooting them at a distance. The same thing goes for your magic rings, but you only get a few casts with them, whereas you probably have a ton of bullets hanging around. Maybe it's just my fault for saving on my ammunition and choosing the bosses just to see if I could, instead of using my guns more regularly. The bosses are alright overall. Some of them are even incorporated into the stage itself in various ways. It helps them feel like a real part of the level instead of just some tougher enemy behind a door. I might have had a higher opinion of them if I didn't cheese them just to see if I could. There are some memorable non-boss encounters though. Each area tends to have its own mechanic or environmental challenge you need to work around, and I have no idea if this is true, but I feel like this game inspired the Black Knights from Dark Souls. For those who don't know, the Black Knights were tougher than usual enemies who could possibly drop good equipment if you went out of your way to beat them. This game features rare black enemies that are also tougher than usual and drop good loot. Maybe it's just a stylistic choice, but these games are always linked by similar motifs. Except for the most important one. Now there isn't a thorough wiki on this game, so I may be wrong, but I can't find any version of the Moonlight Sword here. This has been a recurring sword in From Software games since Kingsfield 1, and they were pointed in other games by this time, even in games where it didn't make sense. It was in Armored Core. It apparently wasn't in the original Shadow Tower either, but it's just so weird for some reason not to see it here. Other points of minor criticism include enemy respawns being a little annoying in areas where you aren't going in a mostly straight line. You'll end up having to kill them multiple times, and they really should have given some of them a longer spawn time. Status effects also put up a color filter over your screen, and it's pretty ugly and annoying. Besides that, you could say that Shadow Tower Abyss feels a bit short. It took me around 8 to 9 hours to beat it, also doing the optional areas, and I was actually surprised with how abrupt the final boss was. Maybe they wanted to do more but couldn't? At least what we got was pretty fun. The game even has a collection list to see all the items you've gotten, and a bestiary. More games like this need bestiaries. Shadow Tower Abyss is a great game that really should have been given a chance at a worldwide market. Its gameplay, design choices, and so many things about it are just so charmingly quirky in my opinion. Sure, there could be a bit more polish and balancing in some aspects, but this really familiar but different experiment is much more enjoyable and entertaining to me than a technically better game that follows standard conventions. So if you want a short but fun first-person dungeon crawler with good combat that will keep you guessing on what you'll find next, or you just want to see what other cool games From Software has developed, go play Shadow Tower Abyss. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you liked it for some weird reason, consider leaving a like or comment. If you didn't like it, well, leave a comment anyways about what I did wrong. If you want to hear about more games I think are neat, or whatever random thing I end up making videos on, maybe also think about subscribing. Whatever you choose to do, I hope you have a nice day.